I'm alive. I shouldn't be.
He should not be alive. This is unfucking believable.
From the heart of trucker America, my boy Reed Coverdale, host of The Naturalist Capitalist.
This is what government does. It sucks.
If you think you're going to win people over by stating commonplaces, you're just selling the other part.
It is about dictating every transaction that you have for the rest of your life.
Mr. Potato Head.
Coverdale is the guy to be president of the United States.
You intimidated me with your perfect 70s porn star.
That was the beginning of my problems.
The guy doing what he loved, chasing a minor.
But I'll put a 50 cal attached to my Suburban.
Libertarians need to get out of New York.
The gulag is going to be in your house.
This guy's a fucking murderer. He deserves to be in a dungeon.
Gotta get him out of that truck at night and get him into the White House.
Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Naturalist Capitalist. I am obviously your host, Reed Coverdale. I went to a Defend the Guard rally today, the 21st anniversary of the September 11th attacks in 2001, and I gave a 10-minute speech about how, you know, we see the hashtag never forget, but we need another hashtag, like never learn. We never learn anything. You know, I actually read Osama bin Laden's 1998 fatwa out loud. I had it pulled up on my phone, read it out loud. He made 3 points. One of them was for sanctions and support for Israel, and the other one was just support for Israel and its aggression of its neighboring states. And then the third reason was for occupying the Arabian Peninsula and surrounding Muslim territories. And I mean, if those are the things that we should be changing, we're certainly not doing well. You know, we still sanction enemies of Israel all over the place. We back Israel on every single thing they do. And we are occupying more of their land than when Osama bin Laden wrote this back in 1998. But anyway, tonight we're going to be talking about 9/11 and about the anomalies that took place on that night. And during my speech, I was very tempted to actually connect some of my knowledge of 9/11 and the attacks and, you know, talking about Israel or Saudi Arabia's involvement. But I didn't even want to do it because I didn't want to, I didn't want to take anything away from the Defend the Guard movement. I didn't want to associate it with the 9/11 truth in any way because the whole subject has just become so ruined by sensationalizing everything. So I didn't even tie it in, even though it was tempting. And of course, I've got one of the best on 9/11 out of the researchers we have. We've got Adam Fitzgerald on the other end to talk about it tonight. How you doing, Adam?
Hey, thanks for having me, Reed. Yeah, it was great. Wow, I didn't know you read the fatwa. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I changed a couple words because I didn't want to be recorded. You know, I mean, even though I understand some of Osama bin Laden's anger, right, like there's definitely some anti-Semitic rhetoric in his fatwa, so I kind of changed some words here and there. But I read the statement was very obvious that he was making. But yeah, you were at Ground Zero today. I know you've been a few times on 9/11. What was your takeaway from being there today? What type of people did you run into there, and what are your thoughts on the truth movement after being there today?
Well, I'll tell you what. I went very early because I thought maybe we could get to the ceremony. I went with a childhood friend named Mike Garofalo. He's a 9/11 researcher in his own right, and we went down there very early because we thought maybe we'd get to the ceremony, and we just found out that it was not open to the public. Actually, so they have a lot of blocks cordoned off. Now, Vice President Kamala Harris was actually there, and I think another dignitary was there too. I forgot who that was, but we couldn't get anywhere near like the Freedom Tower and the museum because they're closed to the public that day. And so we waited around, and all of a sudden, you know, we saw some of the more popular street activists who were active online. And there was about maybe I'd say 10 to 15 of them, Reed. And they had a huge banner. The name of the street they were on is Vesey Street, and everybody's not familiar with downtown Manhattan. Vesey and Broadway is a very popular area. It's 2 blocks north of where the World Trade Center is. It's ground zero, and it's about 3 blocks from the Freedom Tower. And they were on a corner, and they had a bullhorn. They had signs all over the place for a block long. And so they were making some noise. I mean, one of the activists there, I've known him for a couple of years online. His name's Gene Laratonda. And he was screaming out his lungs. He didn't have a speaker or a bullhorn or anything. And later on, they got a speaker. And I told him, I remember telling him, I said, you're not going to have a voice by 1 or 2 o'clock because he's like screaming. And meanwhile, across the street, all these cops and Secret Service are watching him. Like they're watching him, looking at him. And, he's yelling about how many people died on 9/11. He goes, they killed your brothers and sisters. The guy, I tell you one thing, I know I disagree with him on a lot of times, but that guy is an amazing activist because his passion is there. And he comes down, he lives in Pittsburgh, and he comes down on his own dime. He brings all his signs and stuff. And I'm like, that's, for me, that's respectable, even though I'm totally opposite of like a lot of his points and stuff. And we get heated sometimes, but I even shook his hand, hugged him, and I said good luck, stuff like that. But interesting times. But there was a lot. I saw a lot more. What's it called? Jesus Christ for Latter-day Saints people. There was at least 100 of them, all in different spots downtown, and all the signs that they had was like, "Do you believe in suffering?" And I'm like, "This is not the day to do that, friend." I mean, God, you couldn't have picked a worse day to use that as like a slogan, and like people going to hell and they're screaming like, wow, this is nuts. If you've never been down there, it's like a clash of these draconian worldviews, monotheisms that are always at odds with one another. It's strange, very strange feeling. Overall, it was a good experience. It always something else. And if you ever go down to Ground Zero, go down to the Freedom Tower. It's a huge building, and also where the waterfalls are. That's where the World Trade Center towers were. They're now waterfalls, and it's majestic. Yeah. It's beautiful over there, but very serene as well at the same time.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get right to it. I want to talk about some of the anomalies surrounding 9/11 and the things that are usually brushed over. So I don't even want to get into the kook stuff, the no planes, whatever. I just want to talk about like what actually happened. So I know you're known as the Rain Man of Saudi Arabia. So let's start out with some of the Saudi Arabian stuff. So first of all, it's important to point out that 2 hijackers who were on Flight 77, Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi, they were being monitored by the NSA and the CIA for a long time. And one of the red flags that took place while they were being monitored was they had money wired to them by organizations that were affiliated with Saudi royalty. And this was I think the CIA, was it the CIA or the NSA or both that recorded that transaction?
Well, CIA.
Okay. Yeah. But they were following these guys around a lot, and they got these, this money they got this money wired to them from the Saudis, and they knew about this right up until the September 11th attacks. But I was wondering if you wanted to expand a little bit more on Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Mihdhar, the Flight 77 attack on the Pentagon, and how the Saudis financed them.
Yes, the biggest key, one of the most illuminating key periods of 9/11, including pre-9/11. Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi had long-standing relations with al-Qaeda. Out of the 9/11 hijackers, they had the most experience. It's alleged that they served in Chechnya. It's also alleged that they were part of, at some way indirectly, with the bombings of the East Africa embassy bombings in Kenya and Tanzania. And it's also alleged that they were also directly involved with the bombing of the USS Cole in 2000. So it wasn't some mystery that the intelligence community, especially foreign and domestic and foreign, Saudis knew them well, that these guys were basically just coming out of nowhere, but everyone knew who they were in the CIA and the Saudis as well, and even the NSA. Khalid al-Mihdhar, and I think I had to bring this up because this is central to 9/11. Khalid al-Mihdhar is actually married to a woman named Hoda al-Hada. And you're probably asking, well, who's that? Well, she's the daughter of a man who lives in a house in Yemen, Sana'a, Yemen, that's the capital. And his name is Ahmed al-Hada. And you're probably asking, well, who's that? Well, he owns a house that would later be called the Al-Qaeda Communications Hub. And this house basically became the worldwide connections hub for Al-Qaeda communications. And how the intelligence community learned about this was way back in the early 90s. The NSA were monitoring Osama bin Laden's satellite phones. These were called Inmarsat satellite phones. One was actually bought in Long Island, New York, I think for a price of like $12,000 at the time. Satellite phones were very expensive. They're very rare at the time. And so the FBI, who was monitoring some guy opposite of bin Laden and Al-Qaeda because he had links to Hamas. So they asked the NSA to, hey, listen, could you basically track that phone and track the phone calls? Well, the NSA got back to the FBI and said, yes, we can because it's a decrypted phone. It's not encrypted where they can't listen. So they were listening to the phone calls. And what they found out was that this phone is actually being used in the United States and it was shipped to Tora Bora, Afghanistan later, and also shipped to the Sudan where bin Laden actually was living in. And so they tracked this phone and they were listening to the phone calls over the years. And in 1996, when bin Laden relocated to Afghanistan, they found out that one number kept calling back and he kept calling it. And they were wondering, wow, this is a really popular number. Let's track where this number is. And they found out that this house was belonging to Ahmed al-Hada. So they red flagged this number. Now they had two live operations. One was the satellite phone that bin Laden was using from 1992 until he stopped in 1998, and the house in Yemen. So they were monitoring that house from 1996 to 2001. So one operation was 6 years, one operation was 5 years. And you could just imagine what these people are talking about on the phone. You had Osama bin Laden, you had Mohammed Atef, who's the Al-Qaeda military commander, Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri, who's the second in command of Al-Qaeda, and God knows who else all over the world. So it's like the intelligence community will later say, oh, we just didn't have enough intelligence. They were over and abundant. Later on, former senior executive of the NSA, Thomas Drake, would later say that the NSA had so much metadata, more metadata than any agency in the world, foreign or domestic, that they probably could have stopped 9/11 alone. So Khalid al-Mihdhar basically was living in this Yemen house. And one day the NSA heard about this phone call that there was going to be a high-level meeting in Malaysia, a terrorist summit meeting. And Khalid al-Mihdhar was invited along with Nawaf al-Hazmi to go to this meeting. The NSA told the CIA about this because they don't do human intelligence. And so the CIA agreed to take pictures and send it to the NSA. So when Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi went to this meeting, at this meeting were all the bigwigs of terrorism around the world, from groups like Abu Sayyaf and Jemaah Islamiyah, people like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Fahad al-Quso, Tawfiq bin Attash, Ridwan Isamuddin, who goes by Hambali, Zacharias Moussaoui was alleged to be there, and Salim al-Hazmi, who's the brother of Nawaf al-Hazmi. A lot of people were at this meeting. And the Malaysian authorities are taking pictures and they send it to the CIA. Everybody coming and going for 3 days. But the CIA never shares the pictures with the NSA. And so they keep it and hoard the information. What they found out later, now there's one story that they both stop at a hotel after the meeting. And when they leave the hotel, the CIA breaks in and takes pictures of their passports. But to their shock, on the passports are U.S. visas. So they're coming to the United States. They share this information with a bin Laden issue station unit, codenamed Alex Station, which is a virtual station for all domestic intelligence agencies like the FBI, NSA, CIA, DIA. All intelligence agencies are working as some way or another, supposedly sharing information. Later on, we find out they're not. Anyway, the cable comes in. These two guys, known Al-Qaeda operatives, coming to the United States. The CIA sits on the information. Later on, an FBI agent tasked to the Alex station named Doug Miller, he reads the cable, and to his horror, he reads it and runs to his desk and writes a draft cable. However, he needs permission from the CIA to send this information because it's not FBI information.
Right.
So it goes to the deputy director of Alex Station, Tom Wilshire, and he reads the cable and gives it to his analyst, Michelle Ann Casey. And she reads it and puts on the sign, puts on the cable, please hold off per Wilshire. The cable's never sent. Mark Rossini, who's another FBI agent, who's his boss is John O'Neill of New York Counterterrorism. He goes to Michelle Ann Casey and complains, hey, why is Doug Miller's cable not being sent? And she tells them the following: we think the next attack is in Malaysia, so it's not an FBI matter. We'll let the FBI know. And he yells at her saying, they're coming to the United States. It is a matter. And she says, no, they're not. They come to the United States, January 15th, 2000. And while they're here, the Saudis, out of nowhere, start funding them. People like Omar al-Bayoumi, Osama Basnan, Fahad al-Thumeri, who's an imam at the King Fahd Mosque. Meanwhile, the FBI, the State Department, no idea they're in the country. And they're here in the country itself. For 16 months, the CIA, the NSA, never told the FBI, never told the leading principals meetings at the White House. Nobody knew nothing until August of 2001, late August 2001, when Richard Blee, who is the chief of Alex Station, comes in and holds an emergency meeting with Condoleezza Rice, the National Security Advisor of Bush, and says, we got to tell you something. There's 2 al-Qaeda operatives living inside the United States, and tells them their names, but doesn't tell them they had U.S. visas. And Richard Clark, who's the head of the National Counterterrorism Security Council, he's like, well, how long did you know this for? And so they lied to him and said, well, we don't know how long this information's been out. But they knew exactly when it was been out. Meanwhile, the FBI sends like a rookie agent outside to try and find a needle in a haystack of Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi. Meanwhile, the NSA is still monitoring Nawaf al-Hazmi's cell phone. He's making calls inside the United States, doesn't tell nobody. The CIA knows exactly where they are and doesn't tell nobody. The Saudis, too, they know. There's some operatives here. They know where they are. So they go on to hijack American Airlines Flight 77, which crashed into the Pentagon. Now, for those who basically say, well, we don't know if a plane hit the Pentagon or we think it's a drone and whatnot.
Right.
What I just told you regarding malfeasance, maybe even complicity by foreign intelligence, all of that, what I just told you, doesn't exist.
Right. Yeah, so specifically with the funding that they received from the Saudis, who sent that? How are they connected to the Saudi government? And what was that money used for?
Well, the money was used for, let me back up a little bit. Omar al-Bayoumi was a longtime U.S. resident, and he basically had no-show jobs at Dawa Avco company. And basically, this information was actually redacted by the FBI, and that's under orders of the Bush White House to protect Saudi Arabia from having any links with 9/11 itself. Osama Basnan is a radical militant, unlike al-Bayoumi. Al-Bayoumi was considered a spy. Later on, I didn't say this before either. Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi, while they were living in an apartment that was which was rented by Omar al-Bayoumi for 2 months, and then they started paying rent. Basically, this money was coming from 2 sources. One, from Omar al-Bayoumi's no-show Saudi government job, and 2, a bank account that was linked to the former U.S. Saudi ambassador Bandar bin Sultan, also known as Bandar Bush, because he has a close relationship with the Bush family going back to senior. And he has an account at Riggs Bank. And his wife, Haifa bin Faisal, was taking out money from his husband's account and sending it to another woman named Mawida Dewejak, who basically was the wife of Osama Basnan. And she was giving it to her husband, Osama Basnan, who was giving that money to Omar al-Bayoumi, who was giving that money to Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi. Now, later on, when the 9/11 Commission basically interviewed Omar al-Bayoumi and Osama Basnan, they basically said the following, that money was going for surgery and hair implants for the wife for the last, I think, like 12, 14 months. And it was coming in increments every month, like $3,000 to $5,000. Anything over $5,000 is investigated by the IRS. Any deposit anyway. So they basically were playing it safe by sending in these increments of monthly financial deposits. But basically they lied because, the surgeries or the implants basically didn't cost as much, and it didn't last as long as they said it is. Now, they don't have to prove where the money was being sent because nobody's charging them with any crimes. Even though after 9/11, Omar al-Bayoumi was actually detained by British authorities and was held in Scotland Yard, and he was investigated and cleared of any wrongdoing and was relocated back to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Later on, the reports that came out through the FBI, Penpom report, and later Operation Encore, would later state that Omar al-Bayoumy's employer was redacted. And just last year, the Biden administration did something good. Well, take that with a grain of salt. Did something good, and finally unredacted the company name. And the company name actually was Saudi Arabian Air National Trans Airlines or something like that. And what happened was it also happened to basically unredact the name of the person who hired him. And basically, I want to say it was Hamid al-Rashid is the person who hired him. Now, he has a son named Saud al-Rashid, and you're probably saying, why does this matter? Well, when the FBI went to investigate the Rashids, Saud Rashid was on a CD-ROM, his passport, on the same CD-ROM with the passports of Abdul Aziz al-Amari, Marwan al-Shehi, and I think another hijacker. So there's a link right there between Omar al-Bayoumy's employer, his employer, and the 9/11 hijackers. Because for years, Omar al-Bayoumi told investigators he never knew Khalid al-Mihdhar, he never knew Nawaf al-Hazmi. He even denied knowing Osama Basnan directly, and he did. And all of this was untrue.
So the 28 pages that were released a couple of years ago, what information did that reveal that people were looking for? And then the report that you were just referencing from, 6 months ago or so, whenever it was that the Biden administration made more transparent, what were the findings in both of those documents?
Well, let's start with the former. The 28 pages were some of the pages that was redacted by the Joint House Intelligence Committee, which is the Joint House Inquiry, which was the second congressional inquiry. The first one everyone knows is 9/11 Commission. The Joint House Inquiry was a joint inquiry of members of the House and Senate that basically were investigating they were investigating the domestic agencies of the United States, the FBI, the CIA, and the NSA. And they found through these pages that through their investigation that the Saudi government actually had agents inside the country that were getting Saudi financing from the kingdom itself and kingdom affiliated organizations. What happened was when the pages were classified, the co-chair Bob Graham had pressed the Senate Select Committee to unredact them and basically release the material to the public, in which the State Department under the Bush administration said no dice because they were still protecting their interests in Saudi Arabia. And that just goes to show you where their allegiances lie, right? So after many years of haggling within the courts, in 2015, the government released a 9/11 document, which was compiled by, I think, Lauren Lesserman. I think I'm getting her name wrong, but I think the last name is right. And it was known as Document 17, which was an overview of individuals of interest in Saudi Arabia that the investigators were pursuing potential links with the Saudi government. And they found out there was a couple of names, such as Fahad al-Thumari, as I said before, Omar al-Bayoumi, Osama Basnan, Modar Abdullah. And these are people that were familiar with Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi that were living in San Diego and Los Angeles because they had jobs there and they were working in these gas stations. One of them was Sam Mustafa, who later Nelson Martins is basically writing a large article with Darren Harvey about, and I think that article is going to be great because not many people know about it. The House Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi basically issued a statement for the full release of the pages. And what happened was in 2016, under the Obama administration, he let out portions of the document, which were later called the 28 pages. But the 28 pages isn't fully redacted. We're still protecting members of the Saudi Arabian government. And one FBI agent I managed to interview, Ken Williams, who wrote the Phoenix memo, basically was told by the FBI, now he's retired, the FBI basically told him, do not help the victims' families against the civil suit with Saudi Arabia. Well, he went anyway, and good for him, bless his heart. But that just goes to show you, even to this day, and that was last year, even to this day, we still don't have unredacted files regarding Operation Encore or the 28 pages, and we still don't have the full story regarding who is being protected from the State Department to the Saudi government, because the Saudi government continues to deny that they had any links with any of the hijackers, even in full light of the latest revelations under Operation Encore that was revealed last year. And to me, that's the biggest smoking gun of all, because now we have a member of the federal Saudi government and a link to the hijackers regarding financial transactions.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, there's, like you said, at the very least, there was a complete lack of competence in letting America know, or the CIA letting the FBI know. But it seems that there was malfeasance and there was assistance given. So, and if they're still trying to protect people, what's that all about? So that's something we definitely should be allowed to, see uncovered and get to the bottom of. I want to switch over to alleged Israeli involvement now. Let's start out with Flight 93. So you've done a whole video, probably more than one video, but one video that I've seen about Ziad al-Jarrah and about his connections to Israeli intelligence. But before we get into his connections, why don't we just talk about let's talk about the anomalies with Flight 93. He's supposedly on the airplane piloting it, but his voice is never picked up on the black box. None of the other hijackers ever shout out his name. The 6 phone calls from the plane all say that there are 3 hijackers with dark skin, and he's a light-skinned dude. So let's just dive into that a little bit. What's really funky about Flight 90, the official Flight 93 story, when it's compared with the witness accounts of what happened in the black box and everything that was recovered?
Sure. The official account by the FBI and the State Department is that Flight 93, which was coming out of Newark and landing in San Francisco, was hijacked by 4 men, with Ziad Jarrah as the alleged pilot, Saeed al-Ghamdi, Ahmed al-Nami, and Ahmed al-Hasnawi as muscle hijackers. But later on, we find out some interesting details that seem to go against the narrative itself. Now, you mentioned the phone calls. Yes, there was a lot more phone calls on this plane than any other plane. It was a whole bunch of calls. I think approximately close to like 30 phone calls. But there was 6 cell phone calls in particular. And I hate when I hear like some truthers anyway, basically say the phone calls are faked. Because if they actually listen to some of them, they actually go against the government's narrative and the federal FBI narrative about 4 hijackers. And let me tell you why. You have 6 phone calls, 2 by flight attendants, 4 by passengers, that basically say the plane was being hijacked by 3 men. And 3 of those phone calls basically say that those 3 men were very dark-skinned males. And I implore everybody who's watching this to Google Ziad Jarrah, what he looks like. He's very light-skinned. He was born in Bekaa Valley, Lebanon. And basically, real quick down about him, he was born in a very affluent family that has long-standing ties in the neighborhood of Bekaa Valley. He went to a Christian school, a very prominent Christian school in Lebanon. He was brought up with no religious training whatsoever. He wasn't a Muslim. And basically in 1996, he goes with his cousin, Salim Al-Jarrah, and basically go to the University of Greifswald, where they take up, I think electrical engineering. I could be wrong about that, or aeronautical engineering or something, because he wanted to be a pilot. But his father basically said when he was younger, he persuaded Ziad Jarrah not to, which later on has some very dark overtones to it. So what happened was Ziad Jarrah, who loves to party, he's a womanizer, basically, while he's living there, he lives alone. He rents a room with a woman in Bochum, Germany, and later on goes to Hamburg and goes into the most fervent mosque in Hamburg called Al-Quds Mosque. Now, out of nowhere, this guy basically, who doesn't, is not religious, basically goes and stays at this mosque, according to the FBI here. Basically, he just stays there and becomes radicalized. Well, that mosque was being watched by the BFV, which is the German intelligence arm, for a long time because they were known to be radical fundamentalists in there. Basically, you have 2 Syrian gunrunners who had connections with Al-Qaeda, Mohammed Haydar Zamar and Mahmoud Darqanzali, who basically meet with Mohammed Atta, who goes here too, Ramzi bin al-Shib, Marwan al-Shei, and Ziad Jarrah meets them and supposedly gets radicalized along with them. Now, those 2 guys basically are helping along with their radicalization. Later on, Ziad Jarrah goes and meets his girlfriend, Azil Sanguine, but he never lives with her. And he's never, ever really seen with any of these guys from Al-Quds, ever. There's no photographs, no nothing. But later on, they find one photograph that he was at a wedding of a person at the mosque named Saeed Bahaji. He goes to this wedding, but there's really no connection to any of these people. Well, much later on, we fast forward, he's living alone inside the United States. He comes to the United States. Let me back up a little bit. Allegedly, him, Mohammed Atta, and Marwan al-Shei, and Ramzi bin al-Shib traveled to Afghanistan. These guys are nobodies, except for Ramzi bin al-Shib. He's an Al-Qaeda associate. But the other guys, they don't know anything. They're young men. And what do? They go to a safe house and being security screened, and they're there for like a week. And then all of a sudden meet with who? They meet the top officials of Al-Qaeda. Osama bin Laden, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Mohammed Atta, Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri. And it's amazing. They shoot right up, and they're being told about this planes operation. And they agree to be martyrs, which is surreal. These are young men. They agree to be martyrs on this operation. Anyway, they come back to they go to Germany. BFVs for following them. Then they come to the United States. Now, Marwan al-Shei and Mohammed Atta go to this flight school called Huffman Aviation, and Ziad Jarrah is separate from them, and he lives separately from them. He's never seen with them, and he goes to his own flight school. And then over the years, even just days before 9/11, Ziad Jarrah takes his muscle hijacking team, goes to New Jersey called the Days Inn Motel. And what does he do? Rents a room for himself and rents a room for the muscle hijackers. Now, you're probably saying at this point, something doesn't seem right here. Well, get ready because I'm about to lower the boom on you. September 11th comes. Now, on September 10th, he writes a letter to his girlfriend, right? Mm-hmm. And in it, he writes a long letter, but he writes the wrong address.
Right.
And he sends it out. Now, September 11th comes. He makes a phone call to his girlfriend. According to the FBI, they don't know whether that phone call originated in his hotel room or in the airport itself. How would they not know that?
Right.
Keep that in mind. So he calls his girlfriend and says, I love you 3 times, and he hangs up. And then it's alleged that, and this is coming from eyewitness testimony in Newark, his boarding pass is ticketed. We have that, his boarding pass. Mm-hmm. He gets on the plane, but the plane is delayed for close to an hour on the runway. What I'm about to tell you now is speculation. This is a working theory me and Nelson Martins are working on.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to tell you why this is going to make sense, and it leads to maybe even a bigger Israeli plot, is that when that plane crashed in Shanksville, there was, like I said, the phone calls, there were 3 hijackers. When they found the debris was interesting. They found 2 business cards, one belonging to an uncle of his named Asim Al-Jarrah, and another one was the burnt passport of Ziad Jarrah. Now, this is my speculation. I don't think Ziad Jarrah ever got on that plane. And you're asking, well, what's your evidence? Well, the evidence is I'm thinking it's going to be the phone calls. Nobody describes Ziad Jarrah. Nobody ever admits that there were 4 hijackers on a plane. They all named 3. You had one guy outside the door, 2 guys in the cockpit. The voices, the voice cockpit recorder survived. The victims' families heard that recording. Never heard the name Ziad Jarrah on it. The transcript is public for everyone to view. Just Google Flight 93 transcript and you'll see it. And not one time is Ziad Jarrah's name is mentioned. Now it stops there, right? No, it keeps going because this is more speculation on my part. I think he was an Israeli mole. Now, what's my evidence for that? Well, later on, it finds out that many years later, a cousin of his is arrested in Lebanon. His name is Ali Al-Jarrah, and he was a spy for Israel for 25 years. He has a brother, Joseph Al-Jarrah, who was helping him spy for Israel for 10 years. He has a cousin, Asim Al-Jarrah, who not only was a member of the Abu Nidal organization, not only was working for Libyan intelligence, not only working for German intelligence, but also working for Israeli intelligence. So this guy really was a big player in the intelligence community and with a even older terrorist organization called Abu Nidal. And basically, what I'm trying to allude at is this. Yes, planes were hijacked. Yes, they were real hijackers. But yes, there might have been that one mole that the CIA, the NSA couldn't get, and that Cofer Black, the CIA counterterrorism coordinator director, basically desperately wanted to infiltrate Al-Qaeda and basically couldn't. But the Israelis probably did, because Ziad Jarrah was all the way down to the day itself, but probably didn't get on that plane and got off and basically disappeared into the middle of the night and probably has a new identity somewhere to make sure that the operations were right through down to the last second, and it was successful because 3 of those 4 planes hit where they did, except for Flight 93. And that's what I think is, now, like, again, take that with a grain of salt. It's speculation. It's a theory we're working on, and we're trying to get more information about it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm just going to reiterate that if you don't believe in planes or hijackers, none of this exists.
None of this exists.
The key thing that you're trying to drive home here. So after the attacks with the airplanes, there was an anthrax attack that took place, and the Israeli intelligence tried to push the narrative along with the Czech Republic government that the transfer of anthrax had gone from Iraqi people to Al-Qaeda, and that Al-Qaeda got the anthrax and mailed it to all the recipients that got the anthrax after the September 11th attacks. This turned out to not be true. The anthrax did not come from Iraq, and it sort of got memory hold, and then they tried to blame it on some lone wolf people who ended up either dead or the trail went cold. I don't know how much you know about this. I know this is more Ryan's expertise, but what do you know about the anthrax attacks and the meeting in Prague that didn't actually take place with the Iraqis and Al-Qaeda? What do you think really happened there?
Yeah, Ryan's fantastic work regarding the meeting in Prague was from Mohammed Atta going to meeting with the Israeli intelligence about meeting with intelligence there, and basically trying to connect these anthrax attacks with Iraq, basically, and that came from Israeli intelligence, and that was basically made up on the spot. That intelligence never existed. He never was in Prague, and so that was like totally made up. There's another story too that is basically nationwide, regarded as, this is the real information, right? Because they didn't want to talk about Israeli intelligence and basically shame them because they're protected, just like the Saudis. They protect their interests. Here, we're talking about 1 week after the attacks, where basically the anthrax attacks were these letters that were coming in and being sent to Enquirer magazine, ABC, CBS, and the New York Post. I think a letter actually later on went to some business. I think it was a media arm it was called The Sun in Florida, and that guy he died, I think. And there were 2 letters that went to senators. I always forget their names. Tom Daschle and Leahy. Patrick Lee. Patrick Lee. And these 2 guys basically were against. Daschle was actually the Senate Majority Leader, and he basically was against an invasion of Iraq. I think he was actually against it or something like that. And these anthrax letters went to them of all people. The 2 Democratic senators. Anyway, they survived. Nothing happened to them. But basically, a whole bunch of letters went out. And Robbie Martin did probably the best work on anthrax, the anthrax attacks. And it was a 5-hour podcast. And it's the best podcast I ever heard regarding anthrax itself. Media Roots Radio. Go take a look at it. It was phenomenal. And I remember interviewing him for it. And what happened was this specific anthrax spores were tracked to one area. Now, the government basically said that this anthrax came from Al-Qaeda. Now, later on, it was alleged that through the torture of a militant named Sheikh Ibn al-Libi, who was captured in Egypt and basically tortured by the CIA and the intelligence arm called the State Security Investigation Services, or the Mahabeth. They actually tortured Sheikh Ibn al-Libi and tortured him to say the following, which actually was what they wanted him to say, that Al-Qaeda was in Iraq with Ba'athist officials and they were making biological and chemical weapons. And the story was linked to this story, not the one in Prague, because that one failed. This story basically said that, yes, this was the same spores that were coming out of Iraq. But guess what, Reed? It didn't come out of Iraq, because these spores were then traced to an archive called Ames, because the strain was called Ames strain, named after Ames, Iowa, which is where the biological chemical warfare laboratories are. Well, what happened? The FBI said, destroy the archive. What? Destroy the archive? What are you talking about? Well, they did. They destroyed the whole archive. Why? Because that's where the strains were. Well, after the archive's destroyed, they find out, oh, we'll just blame this guy, Bruce Ivins. Oh, he just so happens to work with Ames, Iowa, and basically commits suicide because the FBI promotes false charges on him and pressures him to break, and he did break, and he killed himself. And that's what happened with him. But did that stop the State Department from going to the National United Nations Security Council with Colin Powell showing you those vials and basically said this is what they were procuring, these anthrax vials? No, it didn't stop them. They lied straight up to the United Nations Security Council. Great Britain even admitted and said it's not enough for the courts, but it's enough to go to war. And that's what they did. They went to war. And later on, when they're in the middle of war and they find out that there's no anthrax there, the same officials who are basically torturing Sheikh Ibn al-Libi, they go back and say, why did you lie? And you know what he said, Reed? I lied so you would stop hurting me. So what did they do with this guy? He gets deported back to Egypt. They find him hanging in his cell.
Yeah, and I mean, this was a huge connection to Iraq. A lot of people forget. A lot of people don't even know about the anthrax attacks or the link here that was made. That was just built off of complete bullshit, and then just kind of forgotten about afterward. Like once they made the connections they wanted, they just never dug it up again. Yeah, one of the most important things you talk about is the greater ramifications of 9/11. Instead of focusing on whether a building was brought down by controlled demolition or, how an airplane made a turn in Washington, D.C. and hit the Pentagon. Lots of people aren't paying attention to these anomalies. And then the foreign policy after effects that took place, or some that were foreshadowed beforehand in Project for a New American Century. They say we're going to need a new Pearl Harbor in order to have something like this take place. And here's your new Pearl Harbor that happens and authorizes basically endless war in the Middle East. We have technically pulled out of Afghanistan, but there's still drone bombings taking place there. We're never going to actually completely leave. There's still heavy aggression against Iran, even though we haven't actually technically gone to war with them yet. We've been at war in Syria, Libya, like all over the place. It's crazy. And there's no end in sight. And it all, not all of it, but a lot of it stems back to this. And it was a war started over lies. And then even the war that was, initially started over this, the invasion of Afghanistan, was completely unjustified. We had 3 opportunities to get Osama bin Laden before actually invading Kabul. And we could have killed him and been done with it by Christmas of 2001. But we decided to just go full speed ahead along with all the bullshit narrative we were given. And here we are. But yeah, like I said, when I was given my speech at Defend the Guard rally, I didn't want to even associate it with the 9/11 truth stuff because I didn't want to discredit Defend the Guard. If there's any people there who it was their first time or something, they'd be like, oh man, like this is with that. But there is a real interesting narrative that's really searching for truth here that inspired me. I have not been on 9/11 truther, and I don't even really call myself that because I don't like the term, but I've not been someone who's been interested in not unofficial narratives surrounding 9/11 for very long, but it's people like you, like Ryan, like Robbie Martin that have kind of opened my eyes to what's really going on. So just keep up the good work, Adam. We're actually going to go jump on Jackman Radio, and it sounds like there's going to be a party over there. We might have Ryan, we might have Jason Burmis, might have quite a few people over there. So we're going to jump over there. But before we do, Adam, any last thoughts about 9/11 that you really want to get out there for people to consider?
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, everyone's talking about the implosion of the buildings, whether there's planes or hijackers or not, is missing the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is foreign policy guidelines, as well as the intelligence agencies collecting information to make sure operations go as successful as they are, to capitalize on those foreign policy guidelines where the U.S. government and U.S. interests like Israel and Saudi Arabia benefit from the suffering of others. And that's exactly what 9/11 was basically all about, as well as destroying civil liberties inside the United States ever so slowly, so you don't witness or react to it in time, and by then it's too late. But please look at the intricacies of 9/11 and make up your own mind about what really happened on 9/11. We don't have much in the way of real evidence, like there's few pieces of the puzzle out there, but we could actually still make pieces out and put them together and basically fictionalize what the picture might look like, and just keep searching for the truth. And there's some good researchers out there. They're still out there, but few and far between, but we're still out there. And if you want to, ever ask me a question, I'll always be accessible for anybody.
All right. Everyone go follow Adam. I've got links listed in the description to his YouTube and his Twitter. He puts out lots of great information. He does live streams occasionally, and he's pumping out content constantly about all this stuff. I only retain like 10% of it because I'm not nearly as smart as he is. So I have to watch it 85 times to get it. But and actually, I finally met Adam in person. Eric Jackman, and I took a road trip last weekend down to Washington, D.C., and we got to go to a Ron Paul Institute conference, got to meet, it was the second time I met him, but got to meet Ron Paul, Dan McAdams, hang out with Dave DeCamp and Pat McFarlane, all those guys. It was a great time. Make sure you subscribe to my Substack if you haven't already. I talk about that trip that we just took. And yeah, 21 years later, guys, 9/11 is old enough to drink now. So we should be taking lessons from it instead of just thinking that it's those awful Muslims that hate us for our freedoms. When I read Osama bin Laden's fatwa earlier today, I guarantee you none of the reasons were that we have rampant sexual prostitution or scantily clad women in our magazines, or because we eat hot dogs and we allow atheism and Christianity or whatever. Like, it wasn't any of those. Were none of the reasons they attacked us. So let's pay attention to people who are upset at what the United States government is doing now, and I'm not saying we should cave to terrorist demands on every level, but they're upset about us fucking with them. They're not. I'm not saying we should change our own lives and change our own culture to make terrorists happy. That's not the point. The point is that we're bombing them, we're invading their countries, and not just terrorists. Now it's, now we're building, now we have bases and we're doing military drills like right outside of Chinese borders. We did it for years right outside of Russian borders, and look at how that's working out now. And also with all this intelligence agency, build up with the Patriot Act and everything, that kind of is allowing the terrorists to change our culture. Like if there is a moment where we're letting the terrorists dictate how we are going to live our lives in our own country, it is when we pass stuff like that. And when we allow the government to monitor everything, that is proof that Osama bin Laden won. But yeah, Adam, thanks for coming on. Everyone follow us over to Jackman Radio. It's going to be interesting.